The SEC just gave the green light to Stellar Lumens XLM and $100 trillion in assets. Launched under SEC Chair Paul Atkins, this initiative is not just another headline. It's the clearest signal yet that the U.S. financial system is preparing to move markets on-chain. And that includes the securities market worth over $100 trillion. And here's the kicker. Buried in the fine print of all of this, Stellar Lumens XLM keeps popping up. Not in a hyped-up press release, not in speculation from retail, but in real-world institutional use cases, compliance tooling, and pilot programs with some of the biggest players on the planet: DTCC, Franklin Templeton, Arcax, and more. Today, we're going to break down exactly what the SEC just greenlit, why Stellar's unique features like asset clawback, CAP35, matter more than ever, and how $100 trillion in tokenized assets could be the biggest shift in finance since the internet went live. But before we dive in, if you're serious about staying ahead of this institutional wave, make sure you subscribe to Be Crypto Smart. Because when retail FOMO's in, it'll already be too late. For the better part of the last decade, the SEC has been the biggest roadblock in crypto. Every headline felt the same. Lawsuits against projects, vague enforcement actions, press releases designed to scare retail out of the market. Instead of clear rules, we got regulation by enforcement. Instead of innovation, we got fear. But as of July 31st, 2025, that era is officially over. That's the day SEC Chair Paul Atkins announced Project Crypto. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss the single biggest regulatory pivot the US has made in digital assets. This isn't just a new framework. This is the SEC saying, in plain English, we want capital markets to move on-chain. Let that sink in. For years, crypto has been treated like a threat. Suddenly, it's being positioned as the future of US financial dominance. Atkins isn't talking about clamping down. He's talking about empowering the industry with rules that make sense. Here's what's inside Project Crypto. Clarity on token classification for the first time. The SEC will draw clear lines between what counts as a security and what counts as a commodity. That means no more endless lawsuits over whether something like XRP or XLM is one or the other. A safe harbor for innovators, projects will get breathing room. Instead of building under the constant threat of enforcement, startups will have a defined window of time to launch, grow, and comply without being crushed. Modernized rules for token distribution, ICOs, airdrops, token grants, these have been legal gray zones for years. Now they'll fall under updated, transparent guidelines. Support for tokenized securities. The SEC is no longer pretending tokenized stocks and bonds are fringe experiments. They're acknowledging this as the future of capital markets. Streamlined disclosures. Instead of impossible compliance designed for Fortune 500 giants, there will be tailored reporting standards for digital assets. And here's the line that changed everything. Paul Atkins said the US must become the crypto capital of the world. This is a complete reversal from the Gary Gensler era, when the SEC's unofficial stance was that every token was a security unless proven otherwise. For years, projects left the US because the rules were unclear. Now, the world's largest financial market is saying, "Come back. We're ready for you." But let's be clear, this isn't just about making life easier for startups. This is about protecting US dominance in global finance. The SEC isn't flipping out of kindness. They're flipping because tokenization is inevitable, and if the US doesn't lead, someone else will. And that brings us to the DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. Most retail investors have no idea how important the DTCC really is. They don't make headlines, but they're the plumbing of Wall Street. Every stock you buy, every bond that trades, every mutual fund that clears, it all passes through the DTCC. Here's the scale. They settle around $2.50 quadrillion in transactions every year. They custody over $100 trillion in assets. They touch roughly 96% of US securities transactions. In other words, if the DTCC moves on-chain, the entire financial system moves on-chain. And guess what? They've already started. Their pilots for tokenization have already tapped Stellar features, most notably the asset clawback function co-developed with Securrency. This isn't a future vision board. This isn't a 2035 roadmap. This is happening right now. And here's why it matters. When regulators greenlight something as big as Project Crypto, it's not about retail speculation. It's about creating the legal and technical foundation for institutions like DTCC to bring trillions of dollars of assets into tokenized form. Think about that. The SEC, the DTCC, and Stellar's tech stack are all now converging. And for the first time ever, the rules, the rails, and the regulators are aligned. That's why this moment is bigger than a bull run. It's not hype. It's not a meme coin pump. It's the financial system itself being upgraded. DTCC, Dan Doney, and Stellar's institutional backbone. When we talk about the future of tokenization, there's one name you cannot ignore: Dan Doney. Most people in crypto have no idea who he is, but inside institutional finance, he's the guy shaping the entire playbook for bringing trillions of dollars in assets on-chain. Doney co-founded Securrency back in 2015, long before tokenization was even a buzzword. While the rest of crypto was obsessed with ICOs and retail speculation, Doney was focused on the boring but crucial question: how do you make digital assets work inside the world of regulated securities? That single obsession put Securrency miles ahead of everyone else. They weren't trying to build a meme coin. They weren't chasing retail hype. They were building the infrastructure that Wall Street, the SEC, and global regulators would actually need. And guess what happened? The DTCC, the single most powerful clearinghouse in the world, eventually acquired Securrency as their digital assets arm. That's right. The same DTCC that settles $2.50 quadrillion in trades every single year and safeguards over $100 trillion in assets decided that Dan Doney's company would lead their tokenization strategy. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Stellar's hidden connection. Before Securrency was acquired, they worked directly with the Stellar Development Foundation to co-author CAP35, the asset clawback feature. If you've been following my channel, you already know why clawback is such a big deal. Regulators demanded it. Institutions needed it. Without it, securities could never legally exist on-chain. And Stellar already has it baked into the protocol. That's not a coincidence. That's not a marketing stunt. That's a direct link between the guy now leading tokenization at DTCC and Stellar's technology. Dan Doney himself has publicly praised Stellar for being lightweight. It doesn't need bloated smart contracts for simple functions. Compliance-ready features like clawback and trustline controls are native, not bolted on. Non-profit-driven, the Stellar Development Foundation isn't chasing shareholder profits, which gives regulators more confidence in its neutrality. Think about that for a second. The man sitting at the center of DTCC's $100 trillion tokenization strategy has hands-on history building compliance features into Stellar. That should make everyone stop and think. Institutions don't care about hype. Here's the truth most retail investors don't want to hear. Tokenized securities are not like meme coins. Institutions don't care about funny dog logos or TikTok hype cycles. They care about three things: regulatory safety if fraud happens. Can it be reversed? Can regulators step in if there's a problem? With Stellar's clawback, the answer is yes. Custody solutions securities markets have strict rules around custody. Someone has to be the official transfer agent, keeping records of who owns what. On Stellar, that role can be mirrored directly through the network's compliance features. Global reach: Wall Street isn't just New York anymore. Capital flows are global, moving across borders 24/7. Stellar's network was literally designed for that kind of international settlement. Stellar checks all three boxes. And this isn't theory. This isn't some futuristic white paper. This is technology that's already built, already tested, and already in use. DTCC doesn't do maybe, and here's the final piece. DTCC doesn't move on maybe. This is an organization owned by the largest financial institutions in the world. They don't experiment unless they know it's inevitable. When DTCC starts running pilots in tokenization, it's not for fun. It's because the market is going there, period. And who do they have connections with? Stellar. Stellar's fingerprints are all over the compliance infrastructure that makes tokenized securities even possible. Without those features, tokenization would still be a dream sitting in a white paper. With them, it becomes a regulatory green light. So here's the takeaway. Tokenization is no longer optional. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And Stellar is one of the only networks that has already solved the problems regulators demanded be solved. When you connect the dots between DTCC, Dandoni, Securrency, and Stellar, it paints one of the clearest pictures we've ever seen of where this is headed. Why Stellar's clawback could unlock trillions. Let's get into the feature that almost no one in retail talks about. Clawback. In crypto, the sacred word has always been immutability. Once something is on-chain, it can never be changed. That's the philosophy that underpins Bitcoin, Ethereum, and most of the crypto ethos. Code is law. It's censorship-resistant, permanent, untouchable. But here's the reality. That works for Bitcoin. It works for decentralized money that thrives on not having an overlord. But when you're talking about trillions of dollars in regulated securities, stocks, bonds, money market funds, immutability becomes a massive liability. Why? Because real-world finance isn't clean. Mistakes happen. Fraud happens. Custodians lose keys. CEOs die with access codes. Exchanges disappear overnight. Regulators can't just shrug and say, well, too bad. It's immutable. That doesn't fly when you're responsible for protecting pension funds, sovereign wealth, or insurance reserves. Enter Stellar's solution. CP35. This is where Stellar changed the game. In partnership with Securrency, the company Dandoni built and DTCC later absorbed, Stellar introduced CAP35, the clawback standard. Here's what it does. Authorized reversals if an asset was fraudulently obtained or transferred by mistake. An authorized party, like a transfer agent, can reverse the transaction. Regulatory compliance. Regulators can demand corrections without tearing down the entire system. Identity and custody recovery. If someone loses keys but can prove their identity, they don't lose everything. Assets can be reassigned correctly. Now, to retail investors, this sounds boring. Nobody is rushing into Telegram groups screaming, clawback is pumping the charts. But in the boardrooms of BlackRock, DTCC, and State Street, this is the stuff that unlocks the floodgates. Why? Because it solves their number one objection to putting securities on-chain. Without clawback, securities couldn't legally exist in tokenized form. With clawback, the SEC, EU regulators, and central banks can check the compliance box and say, okay, this works inside the law. The institutional reality. This is why Stellar keeps showing up in tokenization discussions. It's not because they have the flashiest marketing. It's not because influencers are shilling it on Twitter. It's because Stellar built the exact features Wall Street demanded. And let's be blunt. Regulators don't care about what works for Dogecoin. They care about what works for regulated securities worth trillions. So when you hear people say, oh, Stellar is boring or it's just for payments, remember this. Boring is exactly what institutions want. They don't want wild volatility. They don't want uncertainty. They want rails that are compliant, safe, and globally scalable. Clawback is boring for retail, but it's rocket fuel for institutions. Why this unlocks trillions? Think about what this really means. If regulators can sign off on Stellar's framework, and they already have in pilots, then there is no barrier left to moving trillions of dollars of securities on-chain. That's not hyperbole. That's the endgame, taking what DTCC currently holds, over $100 trillion in assets, and migrating it into a format that can settle instantly, globally, 24/7. And here's the part most retail investors will miss. This won't come with a giant press release saying, we're using Stellar. It will happen quietly, behind the scenes. BlackRock will tokenize a bond fund. Franklin Templeton will issue another money market instrument. DTCC will pilot a new clearing system. And the tech running under the hood? Stellar's compliance features. By the time retail realizes what's happening, the integrations will already be live, the rails will already be in place, and the money will already be flowing. That's why this feature is so important. It's not flashy. It's not sexy. But it's the difference between crypto staying in the speculation lane and crypto becoming the infrastructure of global finance. And Stellar, through clawback, is already there. Tokenization is already here, and Stellar is in the mix. Here's the reality most retail investors still haven't grasped. Tokenization isn't coming. It's already here. While people argue on Twitter about whether crypto is dead, or whether meme coins can hit 1,000x. The biggest names in traditional finance are quietly re-architecting their products to live on-chain. And if you know where to look, you'll see that Stellar isn't just in the conversation. It's already being used. Franklin Templeton, the $270 billion proof. Let's start with Franklin Templeton. They're not some startup experimenting in a sandbox. They're one of the largest asset managers in the world, with over $1.6 trillion under management. Back in 2021, Franklin Templeton started experimenting with blockchain-based funds. Fast forward to today, and their $270 billion money market fund has been partially launched on Stellar. What does that mean in plain English? Investors can literally hold fund shares as tokens on Stellar's blockchain. This isn't crypto wrapped in a stock. This is a regulated, real-world investment fund choosing Stellar as the rails to issue and manage tokenized shares. It's no longer theory. It's real capital, real assets already moving. Wisdom Tree, tokenized gold and treasuries. Then you've got Wisdom Tree. They're a $100 billion asset manager, and they've been making aggressive moves in tokenization. On Stellar, they've issued tokenized assets like gold and US treasuries, two of the most important building blocks in global finance. Why does this matter? Because gold and treasuries are the ultimate liquidity anchors. If institutions are willing to tokenize those assets on Stellar, it means they trust the chain for the highest grade financial instruments on Earth. ABN AMRO, green bonds go on-chain. In Europe, ABN AMRO, one of the Netherlands' biggest banks, has tokenized green bonds on Stellar. Think about the significance here. Green bonds are a cornerstone of ESG finance, which has trillions of dollars in global capital chasing it. If banks are already choosing Stellar to issue these instruments, it's because they see it as a compliant, scalable, and regulator-friendly platform. Again, not hype, not speculation. Actual banks, actual bonds already live. ArcHax, building the institutional marketplace. And then there's ArcHax. ArcHax isn't a crypto exchange like Binance or Coinbase. It's a UK-regulated digital asset exchange and custodian built specifically for institutions. And just weeks ago, they secured a fresh investment directly from the Stellar Development Foundation to scale tokenized securities. That means Stellar isn't just waiting on the sidelines, they're actively funding the infrastructure that will host the next generation of tokenized stocks, bonds, and funds. ArcHax already has approvals from the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, which makes it one of the most credible platforms for institutions in Europe. By linking directly with ArcHax, Stellar positions itself at the heart of tokenized finance in one of the most tightly regulated markets in the world. The bigger picture, Stellar's dual role. Now let's zoom out. All of this ties back to one theme. Traditional finance is moving quietly, and Stellar keeps getting the call. And it's not just about securities. Stellar is also becoming the backbone of global stablecoins. Today, Stellar hosts over 7 different fiat-backed stablecoins, including USDC Circle, Euro stablecoin, Japanese yen, GMO Trust, Canadian dollar, Australian dollar, South African rand, ZAR coin, Dutch stablecoin MAR. That's not just variety, that's global coverage. Why is this critical? Because when securities move on-chain, they don't settle in Bitcoin or Ethereum. They settle in fiat-backed liquidity. And Stellar has already built a multi-currency stablecoin ecosystem that connects 170-plus countries through its on/off ramps. So when the DTCC, BlackRock, or Franklin Templeton tokenize securities, they need rails for real-world liquidity. And Stellar has them. This is Stellar's strategic advantage. It's not chasing retail hype. It's not trying to build 1,000 DeFi casinos. It's building the plumbing institutions need, compliance-ready securities infrastructure, paired with a stablecoin network that makes cross-border liquidity instant and global. And while everyone else is arguing about ETFs and meme coins, Stellar is quietly embedding itself into the foundation of the next-generation financial system. The $100 trillion question. So here's the question that everyone should be asking right now. Is Stellar about to secure a piece of the $100 trillion securities market? That number isn't random. That's the value of assets already under custody at DTCC. Every stock, every bond, Every mutual fund in the US financial system flows through their pipes. And as we've seen, those pipes are being rewired for blockchain. But let's be realistic here. No single blockchain is going to dominate the future of tokenized finance. Even Paul Atkins himself admitted that there won't be one chain to rule them all. This isn't a winner-take-all scenario. It's a multi-chain world where a handful of players get chosen by institutions based on who can deliver compliance, stability, and liquidity at scale. And that's exactly why Stellar keeps coming up in the conversation. Why Stellar? Let's break it down. Compliance-first features with CAP35, clawback, trust line controls, and built-in regulatory tooling. Stellar isn't just blockchain for blockchain's sake. It was built to satisfy the same regulators who oversee trillions in traditional finance. Global stablecoin network Stellar doesn't just move dollars. It already hosts multi-currency stablecoins across US dollars, euros, yen, Canadian and Australian dollars, South African rand, and more. That means tokenized assets on Stellar have instant access to global fiat liquidity. Institutional partnerships, this isn't theory. Franklin Templeton is already issuing fund shares on Stellar. ABN AMRO has already tokenized green bonds on Stellar. Arcax is building a regulated securities marketplace on Stellar, backed directly by the Stellar Development Foundation. These aren't experiments, they're live products. Regulatory alignment, and now, with Project Crypto, the SEC has given the clearest regulatory green light we've ever seen for tokenization. That eliminates the single biggest uncertainty institutions had before. Put all of this together and combine it with DTCC's scale, 96% plus of securities transactions in the US, and you start to see why Stellar could be the dark horse of this entire financial transformation. The retail blind spot. Here's the real edge: retail doesn't see it yet. Right now, the headlines are all about Bitcoin ETFs, Ethereum staking, Solana meme coins, and whatever hype narrative is trending on Twitter. Retail is chasing the noise. Meanwhile, in the background, Stellar is quietly embedding itself into the rails that will carry trillions of dollars in real-world assets. By the time this becomes obvious to the mainstream, it won't be cheap anymore. The opportunity isn't when CNBC starts talking about Stellar. The opportunity is when Stellar is being integrated quietly by Franklin Templeton, ABN AMRO, and DTCC before retail realizes what's happening. Are you in before the flood? The SEC just gave the green light, not to hype, not to speculation, but to the tokenization of securities. The DTCC, managing over $100 trillion in assets, is already piloting the shift to blockchain, and Stellar Lumens XLM is quietly embedded in the compliance features and tokenization pilots that make it possible. This isn't about if, it's about when. And when trillions of dollars start moving on-chain, the only question left will be, were you positioned before retail woke up or after? That's why we cover this here. That's why we break down the connections between regulators, institutions, and the tech stack that's going to run the next global financial system. So if you don't want to get blindsided by the biggest migration of value in history, make sure you're subscribed to Be Crypto Smart right now, because we'll keep showing you the signals that matter before the floodgates open.